Welcome to the Growth Ventures Podcast, the go-to platform for entrepreneurs, innovators, and changemakers. I'm your host, Hamlet Azarian. In this podcast, we delve into the world of business, technology, and innovation. We bring you conversations with industry leaders, disruptors, and visionaries who are shaping the future and making a difference. So whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply a curious listener, join us on the journey of learning and growth. Welcome to the Growth Ventures Podcast. And now, let's delve into today's episode. Welcome to Growth Ventures Podcast. I'm your host, Hamlet Azarian. Today, we have a special guest whose name has been synonymous with creative entrepreneurship and empowering others. He's the founder of the Futur, an award-winning designer and educator whose mission is to teach 1 billion people how to make a living doing what they love. From building personal brands to negotiating value, his insights have transformed how creatives approach business. Please join me in welcoming the one and only Chris Do. Chris, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Hamlet.
Of course. So Chris, we're going to go through a series of questions. We're going to start initially with the foundation of your personal journey, and then we'll go on to the incredible insights that I'm really excited for you to be sharing with our listening audience. So looking back at your early days, it's an amazing transformation you did, right? You worked at Cole & Weber and then Epitaph Records, both for very brief, short periods. It wasn't like you were there for years, right? And what did you take on at those early lessons that gave you the confidence to be able to start the agency at 95? I'm going to try to do my math here. You were 21, 22. Am I off? 23?
I think I'm 23.
Yeah. 23 at that time, at a very young age. And you're like, man, I'm ready. So what was that transformation for you that gave you the confidence to be able to start and build the agency that you have today?
I think there's something about when you're young, you see the world ahead of you and it's full of possibilities. I think I got my confidence from going to art school. I went to a prestigious design school. I graduated at the top of my class. By the time I graduated, from the time that I started, I ended up pretty much with a full scholarship. I was just a little shy of getting a full scholarship at that point. So I felt like I was making a lot of progress, finding my own identity in the world of design. And so the corporate world just communicated to me that, yeah, you do have something. The first job I got was in advertising at Cole & Weber, as you mentioned. I got that while I was still in school, and I had sent in a portfolio, I think of 3 or 4 pieces, which is very atypical. It's not because I was full of confidence, but I was just not prepared to enter into the advertising industry. And even with the few pieces that I submitted, it was good enough to show somebody who could see the talent or the potential in there to hire me. And so here I am, still in school, flying back and forth from Seattle to Los Angeles every other week. I had a corporate apartment, an expense account. And so things felt like, I think I found my thing. And so from that, everything else transpired.
Was there any particular projects you worked on once you got the job that gave you even more confidence that, man, I'm actually pretty good at this. I should probably be establishing my own shop?
At Cole & Weber, it's less about the projects. They were really big, important corporate clients. So I didn't feel like I could fully spread my wings and fly creatively. But it was the attitude and opinions of my boss, the best boss I've ever had in my life, Kevin Jones, who looked at the work and said, whatever you want to do, we're going to get behind us. This is good. And he knew that in his world, somebody like me was kind of rare. And so he brought me in specifically to elevate the designs in which they were doing. So I could just tell by the way he treated me. When an office was available, he moved me out from the closet. Basically, we were in a tiny little windowless room near the bathrooms, essentially, to the corner office. It wasn't permanent, but he just gave me an office while I was still there and no one was using it. So I think I got a lot of preferential treatment. So it's his attitude, his confidence and belief in me that gave me the idea that I think I'm onto something and people do like what it is that I'm doing.
That's amazing. So it's the leadership skills that he had to be able to spot the talent within you and give you the freedom that you had to flourish. Is that a philosophy you have at the agency now? Are you able to do the same and reciprocate that in the talent that you have on your team?
I try to. I'm not perfect at it. And I'll tell you something, there is a belief system that I have that needed to be challenged, which is we need to treat everyone the same. So for example, if you came to my company and I was hiring you and you're a person who's out of school, so that's the thing, that's the standard, and I gave you a job, let's say in the beginning, design, say, let's say I paid you $50,000. And then a couple years later, maybe through advancements and promotions, you're up to $65,000, $70,000. and there's a new person who graduates from school and they're extremely talented. My old mindset, my old belief was I have to offer them the same amount of money that I offered the other person, because if I gave them more money, it would feel unfair to the person who's been with me for a couple of years. And so my business coach at that time said, no, you and that person negotiated for the best deal for that person at that time. This is a different time. If you want the new person, you have to offer the new person whatever it is that they want and what you feel that you can afford to pay them. So that broke an old belief system that I had. So in the world in which we live in, not everything is as egalitarian as we want it to be. Not everything has to be quote unquote fair. Fair is just a deal that you're able to cut today. Because if you operate with the old operating system, what'll happen is you'll lose out on top tier talent and your company will suffer because of that.
Oh man, I love this. We're already getting into some of the value-based topics that you love to get into, and we're definitely going to dig into a little bit more of this thought process. But before we get there, Blind started in '95. Can you name? I mean, you've worked with some of the biggest brands in the world, right? You guys have worked with, what is it? Sony, Nike,
Microsoft.
Microsoft.
Adidas. Oh, no, I'm sorry, not Adidas, Audi. I was just looking at a pair of shoes and I look, I'm infected here with Adidas. But we worked with Audi. We worked on some groundbreaking music videos for Gnarls Barkley, that crazy video. We worked with Justin Timberlake on Love Stoned. We worked with some of the biggest directors too and biggest agencies in the world.
So obviously the agency didn't start there.
No.
Can you help me understand some of you as a business leader and a creative director of how you were able to grow the agency and get it to a point where it was able to land and such prominent projects and get the type of clients that you guys had over the years?
Yeah, I think living in Los Angeles has its advantages, which is there's a lot of entertainment and gaming companies, things in movies and broadcast television. So there are going to be big brands everywhere around here. And being in the place that we were in 1995 gave us a lot of opportunities, even though I didn't think we were totally qualified to go after them. So I think it was only 2 years out of starting the company, so it's probably like 97, 98 now, that we were invited to pitch on a big Nissan project. We didn't get that, but we were bidding on Sun Microsystems. We were working or bidding on Janus funds, which is not around anymore. Things for like Merrill Lynch and Oppenheimer funds. Some of those institutions aren't around. We even did something for MCI WorldCom, also not around anymore, and a ton of .com. So being in a place where there's a lot of creative culture and businesses trying to make it in the world helps out a lot. So in the very beginning, we got some of the smaller projects. Then what we would do is we would just trade up. One of those projects is like, say we would work on an animated logo for Midway Games. Now that's a good company. I like them, but that is not Microsoft. That's not Sony PlayStation. That's not Xbox. And so what you do is you work on a couple of things, you develop some experience there, and eventually you work your way up to like Electronic Arts as a client. And we did some key art for them. And it just, your reputation starts to expand.
So you land and expand just like any other business strategy. You might start with a smaller project, you do an incredible job on it with the goal of expanding with the team and then being able to be part of the conversation for the future projects, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing. Has anything in your overall design philosophy? I mean, you've been at this a while now, coming on 3 decades, close
Almost,
to
yeah.
3. Has your design philosophy changed over the years, or in generally how you guys approach design, or is it pretty much the same? You guys follow a standard operating process in coming up with the concepts or the designs that you guys are going to do?
I think the core, the spine of my design philosophies remain pretty true. I tend to follow the kinds of rules from the modernist kind of movement in design, the Bauhaus Swiss modern design aesthetic. But in the beginning part of my career, I was probably a lot more concerned about what people were doing. And so we were trend surfing a lot, looking at what the influential designers were doing and emulating that. And towards the middle part of my design career, I started to put that stuff away. And it's like, what is it that I want to say? How do I want to do things? Because there's only so much of that you can consume and feel like it's actually helping you. And I think it's a pretty natural arc for most creative people. First is to admire and to emulate the people that you look up to. And then eventually you start to synthesize that into your own creative style and approach. Towards the latter third part of my design career, I really focus on business strategy and telling stories through messaging, copywriting, and creating a customer experience. And so then I realized something, that all these years I was really focused, hyper obsessed over aesthetics, design, making sure that every pixel was perfectly placed. And then when I got into the latter part of my design career, I realized the power that design has to move people, to change action, or to nudge or influence behavior, and to take a relatively unknown entity and to give them a voice and a story that connects with the customer. I think that was the power, the hidden power of design.
Oh, I love that. So you were able to, it sounds like your own transition as your confidence went up, right? So you were initially emulating others, you were seeing what they were doing, you were also learning from them, but it was more as you built the confidence and you saw the evolution of design with the ability to connect and feel and make people feel and act based off of the design elements itself is where your unique voice started coming out. Did I summarize that well, or?
Yeah, and let me add to that. Everything in the world is designed, mostly poorly designed. Some of it is exceptionally designed. And it's not until you enter into those industries and those spaces that you realize somebody designed it. So for example, when I was growing up, I would go through magazines. Like I would look at Sunset magazine on one side, Boys Life, Highlight magazine, and then later on Esquire and GQ. I didn't realize there are people's job who's to design the editorial spreads and to art direct the photos and curate what's in the scene. And like a lot of the things that you're seeing weren't even real spaces. They were built for the photo shoot. And so those are the things you start to become aware of. When I got into main title design, I didn't realize all those graphics and cinematic plates that were happening were the job of a designer. I just assumed they're part of the film. They were so good at their craft that it would blend seamlessly into the actual film itself. And so when I found out about this, my mind was blown. So I've seen hundreds of films, maybe thousands of films at that time. I didn't realize somebody's job was to create this moment between the trailers and the darkness of the theater and transition you into the movie itself while servicing the legal contractual obligations of the production studio, and to be able to tell stories that way. So that's when my mind's like, oh my God, there's so many things that are happening on an invisible level. Now here's the thing, many people can't appreciate design to maybe the level in which we'd like them to. But I'll tell you something, you can definitely appreciate when something's designed poorly. Like when you go to say, get a driver's license, the DMV is a horrible place here in America. It's just, it's the bane of our existence. And the post office, for example, also very antiquated in what they do. Necessary, good for the public, but horribly designed. And that's what I mean. It's like, you know when it's poorly designed, and every once in a while you can experience something that's designed exceptionally and it makes you feel something inside, a sense of joy.
I love that. I love how you summarize that. And speaking of what finding people and what they love, I know there's a mission and a goal you have
Yes.
of getting 1 billion people to doing a living of what they love to do. Let's talk a little bit about that. So first of all, what set you to put such an ambitious goal, and what have been some of the challenges in you trying to achieve this?
There are two things that happened in my life that was the catalyst for this to happen. The first was when I was meeting with my financial planner. His name is John, and I was sitting there talking to John, like between us talking about spreadsheets, numbers, and forecasting. My wife had gone to the bathroom. John and I are sitting there, laptops open. I said, hey, John, when can I retire? He goes, what do you mean? I mean, like, I don't want to work anymore. I've been working for a long time. I don't want to work anymore. And he goes, you know what? Hold on a second. He looks at his spreadsheets. The numbers go by. I'm like, I don't understand anything what he's doing. He turns to me, he cocks his head over to the side and smiles. He goes, Chris, I hate to tell you this, but you could have retired 2 years ago. Given what you spend, which is fairly modest relative to the amount of money you have and the amount of money you make, you don't need to work anymore. I'm like, that's weird. My wife, who's going to come back in a second, keeps telling me, can you just work for 2 more years? Now, she comes from a place of, I think she comes from an upper middle class family. So there's some feelings about financial security to make sure we have enough so we don't have to worry. That kind of stuff stresses her out. She sits down and I said, honey, you can't believe it, but John just told me I don't have to work anymore. I can retire. And tell her, John, tell her. I egg him on a little bit. He goes, yeah, you guys don't need to work anymore. And she goes, I know. I'm like, babe, what are you telling me? All this time you've been telling me to work a little bit more. Now, she denies that this is not exactly the story, but from my point of view, this is the truth. And since I have the microphone, this is the story I'm telling. Okay, so now I don't need to make money anymore, which is great. I'm not telling you I'm rich and I don't have FU money, but I have enough money that given how we spend and live, we're going to be just fine. And that includes taking care of my children, their college, and helping my parents out when they need help. That's all fine. The second part comes in, we're now an education company and we're transitioning from blind as a service design company towards the future, the company, the future. That's our company. My team has asked me this question because we're sitting around a conference room table. It's still on shaky ground. Like, what is the future? And one of my creative directors, Matthew, had asked, like, Chris, what are we trying to do here? Do you want to sell courses? Is it like masterminds? Is it building a YouTube following? What is it? And he challenged me a little bit. He wanted clarity and definition. And he's a great guy. So I said to him, here's the thing. For my children, it's going to be too late. But I want to create a place where people can go to school for a fraction of what it costs today, that they won't feel it's a compromise to going to an accredited 4-year university. That's what I want to create. And I said, Ben has little children. So by the time they're 18, I hope that we've made a dent in the universe such that they can decide to go to this private art school or they can go to the Futures program and they're not going to feel less than. Actually, they might prefer it. And Ben got all teary-eyed. He's an emotional guy. He's like, wow, that's what we're doing here. So we have to remind people that after all the products and the promotions and the webinars that we do, that what is it that we're here for? We're here to change the way people teach and the way that they learn and to make it equitable for everybody. I go home that night and I kind of think about it. It's like, that's a really long ass story. I need to make that a lot shorter. And by the time the morning comes, I'm in the shower. It's like, you know what? We need to teach 1 million people how to make money doing what they love. I come into the office like 1 million is too small. That's not a big, hairy, audacious goal. Arguably, we've already probably accomplished that with the number of people who've watched our videos. So I change it to billion, and I change it from making money to making a living, because not everybody needs to make money the way that we define it. So the mission statement now is to teach 1 billion people how to make a living doing what they love without feeling gross.
Dude, I love that. I love how you got to your why and how empowering that why is for not just, for the organization, not just for the team, but also everyone else that will one day become part of that future that you're building. And it's an incredible story. What have been, obviously, it's a huge goal. Like
Yes.
this is not, a layup per se. So what have been some of the biggest challenges that you guys have been facing in the early stages of making this goal come to life?
The one that's most obvious is scale. I think the world's population is about almost 8 billion. So something like 1 in 8 people have to be directly or indirectly impacted by something that we've done. So if I teach you something and you teach 100 people, I'm taking credit for that because I don't need to directly impact them. That's okay. So how do we do this? The reason why we have this big, hairy, audacious goal is because it forces us to think at scale. So here's the classic example. Hey, Chris, can you come and lecture to my class of 30 students? Normally, I'm like, yep, that sounds pretty good. That makes my heart happy. But then I was thinking, there are not enough hours in the day, the week, the years that I have left to be alive for me to teach 30 people at a time. How do we create that moment so that hundreds or thousands of people can actually experience it? And then if we can't figure that part out, I have to say no. So big mission statements like this act as decisional filters. A mission statement is worthless if it doesn't actually cause you to take different action or stop you from doing something else. And so that's kind of how we have to think. We have to think in big, audacious ways. And I guess the challenge there is we're just a tiny little company. We're barely 8 people, a couple more independent contractors, and we're a self-funded, bootstrapped company. So I have these big ideas and I have to look around like without taking money because I want to be independent. How do we achieve this? So if we had a ton of money or if I didn't care who controlled the ship, then I think it would be a little easier. But I want to win with my rules, playing the game my way. That's what makes it really challenging.
Ooh, I love that. So overall, the mission is acting as a decision filter. It's forcing you to think about how you can have scale. It's forcing you to make sure that you're prioritizing both your efforts and the team's efforts on the right things and also on what can actually really make an impact. I love hearing that. Let's get a little into it, some of the stuff that you talk about all the time on social media, which is around sales and negotiations and value-based pricing. I know you've talked a lot about this stuff. What is the key, do you think, that and it helps creatives because
I've seen this myself as well within team members that we have, or sometimes when you're even talking to clients, the value that they give to the work, they're like, "What do you mean? It's only X amount of hours." You're like, "No, it's not about the hours, man. There's more." So, can you walk me through how you bring value to the table, especially when people tend to undervalue the work that's being done, particularly for creatives, and walk that conversation a little bit?
Sure. There's a great book on this if anybody wants to learn a little bit more. It's written by an incredible human. His name is Ron Baker, Ron J. Baker, and the book is called Implementing Value Pricing. In it, he chronicles the history of value and pricing. And it says, for the most of the history of man, we've associated time with value. There's all kinds of expressions that time equals money and save time, save money. And so there's this association. And he goes, an acre was defined by how much an ox could plow land in a day, which is fascinating to me. You think there's some scientific rationale behind like why an acre is what it is, which is roughly like a football field. It's because that's how much an ox could plow. And so it's really weird. So we tie this into it. And there are socialists who start to think, or Marxists who define it's like capitalism is a source of all evil because what a person can work, capitalism makes on top of that. So it's kind of like this weird idea. So we have this instinct to say, oh, it's only a few hours of your time. It cannot cost that much. But this thinking starts to break down massively when you start to think about things in terms of like reasonable labor as defined like Marxist theory. And I don't want to get to the theory labor of value, but like there are things that come out of the ground that are worth an inordinate amount relative to the amount of effort and energy. Hard to explain. And there's things that have emotional, sentimental value that have nothing to do with the labor, the necessary labor to produce that thing.
Right.
But let's just say you have someone that you care a lot about, like say your daughter or your son, and they're sick. And you want the very best. And you know that there's some surgeons or some doctors who are heads and shoulders. They're the ones who teach the classes, who writes the books, who lecture all over the world. You want that person. And at this point, you don't really care if it takes 10 hours or 2 hours or 2 minutes. You just want your problem solved. So that's pretty clear to everybody. So if you're sitting there saying to the top surgeon in the world, my child is sick, please make them well, and it probably shouldn't cost that much because it's very easy for you to do. Very
You
few
probably
people
pay
would think
more
of that.
too, right? If they
You
could,
would pay
if they
more.
could, you would, if they could do it in 1 minute versus someone that takes weeks and months before they figure out what's wrong, you would
Yes.
up pay for that, right?
Right. Because now we're starting to get into something that causes a lot of cognitive dissonance for people. Let's strip it all the way down to something super basic. Let's say you want to get a haircut or your hair dyed. I don't have those kinds of problems, obviously. But if you did, it's like, do you want to sit in a chair for 3 hours? If they had a process or procedure that can get you in and out and get you the result that you want, you would actually pay more for less. Let's say you're sitting on the train and it takes a certain amount of time to get to point A to point B. If there's a train that traveled faster, like one of those hyper trains, a bullet train, it can get you there 3 times as fast. You would pay more. Same thing with a Concorde. So if there's a toilet that's exploded, do you really want, I mean, when I have plumbing problems in my house, it's an old house. I don't really want somebody to come in 3 days and take 10 hours to do it. I want
I
somebody
think,
here
I think we have the
yesterday.
same. I think we have the same house. I have the same issue.
See, old homes have that problem, right? We have plumbing problems. And it's like when you lose your plumbing, you feel like you're thrown back to the Stone Ages. Like, what are we doing? We're living on a farm. I want that problem fixed right now. If you want to learn how to build your personal brand, if you want to learn how to do brand strategy or one of these things you want to learn, don't you want to pay more to be able to achieve result faster? So this whole idea of tying value to time is an antiquated concept. It's just tied into like cultural norms. And I don't really like cultural norms for that reason. So now we get into value-based pricing. Like, what is this concept? What does it really mean? Most of the time, what we do is we price something based on a kind of a self point of view. Like, it cost me this much material and resources. This is how much time I spent. What we don't account for is the value, the perceived value that the other person has. The classic example, one that I'll cite Jonathan Stark for, which is his son likes to play video games on his tablet, his iPad. And these games that you can play, the way they get you is they use a freemium model. They get you to buy gems or crystals or resources, and they're worth nothing in the real world. But in the gaming world, it's worth hours of mining and toiling through puzzles and games to
Oh
achieve these
man,
things.
my son he was in one of these games. Pretty much he's 10 years old. He had a panic attack. He thought he had lost all of his power-ups. So I know exactly the.
Yes. And if anybody has a child that plays these kinds of games, you understand to them, this is worth more than real money. So they go, Papa, Papa, can you give me money? You're like, what are you doing? I'm buying gems. And can you do more with that? Can you cheat? Can you advance? They're like, no, I just don't want to sit here and grind on this. My son's done this. This is how this works. So to them, that person, there's lots of value. To you, there's negative value because you're like, shouldn't you be reading and doing your homework or getting outside and doing some sports? To the manufacturer, they can build these gems at scale. It costs them almost nothing to do, but to the player, to the customer, to the buyer, it's worth everything. When you understand that concept, you're starting to get some idea about what value pricing is. It's not pricing based on what you make, it's pricing the customer and not the product or service.
My God, that was a masterclass in value-based pricing. This is one of those you're going to have to rewind and listen to a couple times. Incredible examples. Thanks for sharing that, Chris.
My pleasure.
Let's continue with another masterclass that you're really well at. It's you know, in your Get More Customers series and conversational selling workshops, you discuss a lot of factors about what makes or breaks a sale, really.
Yes.
So what do you think creatives often get wrong when selling their services, and how should they be reframing their approach in general?
Okay. I'm going to speak from personal experience. So I don't want anybody to feel like I'm calling you out specifically, even though you might be doing this. I'm just going to reflect on my own experience. So you mentioned before, how did I get these big clients in the early days? Well, I didn't. I lost a lot of projects in the early days, and I didn't understand how to play the game. And it is a game and there's rules. And I guess in life, everything is a construct. And so there's games and we need to learn the rules. So when I got on the phone with a client or a prospect, they would describe the work, the brief, and then they would immediately ask me, do you have any questions? Do you have any ideas? And with that prompt, I would start pitching. So what's happening in my mind? When they're describing to me what it is they want, I'm not 100% present and listening because I know eventually they're going to stop talking. And now I need to prepare what it is I want to say. So I'm losing out on the opportunity to gain new information, to get the inside track, like the secret door, the phrase that pays. I'm not paying attention to any of that because I'm thinking, oh my God, it's almost time for me to talk. So as soon as they stop, they're like, Chris, what kind of ideas do you have? Well, Mr. or Mrs. Client, I'm thinking this, and that, and you said this, and I want to do. So you're just pitching the whole time. It's kind of like this verbal diarrhea that you're having, and you're just dropping every kind of concept. That's what you're doing. You're spewing all over the place. And what I didn't know at that time was sometimes I might get lucky and say one or two things that lights them up. But I'm hitting them with a lot of wrong ideas. But the thing that I'm doing that's undermining my entire sales process and breaking rapport with the client is I'm not making them feel seen, heard, or understood. And these are very important things if you want clients, especially the ones that are going to pay you a lot of money, which is the game we were playing. They had enough money and prestige to hire any firm in the entire world. So with that kind of choice and power, what are you going to do to stand out? So after a while, I learned, you know what? I just need to be here and to learn how to listen with great intentionality. And so then what I want to do is to treat the words that they say as important as they're supposed to be. So when they say, you know, we were thinking about this big organic cinematic experience for our customers that they've never seen before, I write down some keywords. So when they finish talking, they're like, Chris, do you have any questions or do you have any ideas you want to share with us? I will say to them, you know, I'm intrigued by your phrasing here of this big organic cinematic experience that no one's seen before. Can we unpack that together? What is a big experience for you? What does cinematic mean to you? What is the word organic? And here's what you start to realize. The people on the other side of the phone or on the Zoom screen, they know less than what you know. They use buzz phrases or buzzwords that they don't yet understand nor are committed to. So like, we didn't mean organic because that doesn't mean anything. Big is relative. So cinematic. Now here's an interesting thing. Cinematic, Blair Enns Sites calls this a suitcase word. A suitcase word opens up and has many more words inside. You can't take at surface level what the word cinematic means. And I'll prove it to you right now. Hamlet, what do you think the word cinematic means to you?
Oh boy, I think it means some amazing movie premiere that captures my eye and attention, both visually and sound, and it makes me feel something.
Okay, you mentioned a whole bunch of things actually. Now you said a big movie premiere. Well, there's lots of movies out there. Was there one in particular where you thought about, could you envision it in your mind like this feels like a cinematic movie? Was there a director, an actor, or a scene or something? You're like, wow.
Oh wow. Yeah, now you make me think about that. I would probably now I'm gonna start going through movies that have made me really feel something. Um, Man, I don't know why
Are you
Braveheart
blanking?
Braveheart is jumping in
Okay,
there.
don't worry, don't worry. Just take there. Think about the first movie that you went to see with one of your friends or a first date that you're like, wow, they're gonna like this movie.
Oh, I'll go. A movie that opened up my mind for the first time was Matrix. I
The
remember
Matrix.
the first time I saw the Matrix.
Okay. Are we talking about Matrix 1?
Matrix one, the first one.
Okay. Tell me about an iconic moment or scene, and if you describe it, because I know the Matrix really well, I'll probably be
Blue
able to
pill, red
identify it.
pill. That the
Okay. Do you remember anything about that scene? Where were they? What was the lighting like? The color? Who were the
oh
actors in
man.
it?
Uh Keanu Reeves
Yes.
and uh Samuel Jackson, right? No, was it Sam? No, it wasn't Samuel.
Lawrence Fishburne.
Lawrence Fishburne.
Yes.
And it was dark.
Yes.
I remember very much dark bluish, and then the only thing that popped was the pills, and it made
Mm.
you really think about, all right, which one is he going to take? What does it mean if he takes this one, and all of that.
Okay, so the scene that you're talking about, I think it's beginning to rain. They walk into a darkened kind of manor, maybe a brownstone, and so there's kind of like this sense of history. And we know later on that when we're in the Matrix, there's a green fluorescent cast to everything. So that's how they let you know. In the real world, it's much grittier, but in the Matrix, there's a green cast. And so Keanu Reeves walks into this building. There's a lot of suspense and mystery building up to this moment. Lawrence Fishburne is wearing kind of like a dark leather outfit with his famous glasses with no side pieces, whatever we call it. And there's a thunderstorm. I think lightning's going off in the back. And he just says, "Do you want to see how far the rabbit hole goes? If you take the red pill, we continue down the adventure into Wonderland. If you take the blue pill, you return back to the real world or the world that you think you know." I'm here to answer the question, what is the Matrix? I can't tell you, but I can show you. And he holds it out and he opens it up. And then, of course, Keanu Reeves takes that moment. Okay. And it's shot in a way that the Wachowskis are really well known for. It's this beautiful wide frame, very cinematic. Okay. Now, park that visual in your mind for a second. I want you to contrast it with a different movie because the sequel's coming out after like over 10 years called Gladiator, directed by Ridley Scott, who is famous. Okay. Now, when you think of Gladiator, there's Russell Crowe, the Spaniard, right? And
Right.
there's this iconic scene they keep coming to, and it happens throughout the movie. They're like story beats that are motifs that repeat themselves with his hands in earth. In the opening scene, he reaches down as Maximus, or I forget his name, but he reaches down, he grabs the earth, and he let the dirt falls through, and then they look up and we see like fireballs flying through the sky. He's there to fight the dramatic horde, right? So there's this thing about connecting to the earth. And then when he visits his wife, it's the wheat field that he runs his fingers on. And there's this haunting, chanting melody from this vocalist that's just so incredible. It makes the hair on my neck stand up. It's very beautiful. It's golden light. It's very beautiful. It's always shot like around golden hour. Take those two and compare them and say, to the average person, both are very cinematic,
Right. But completely
but
different.
totally different.
Yeah.
Two different directors, two different genres, two different ways of telling the story. One is a cyberpunk dystopian future. One is a dramatization potentially of a historical thing that may or may not have happened. Very different.
That's
So if you
amazing.
said to me on the phone, Chris, we're thinking big cinematic organic, I could be thinking Gladiator, but the whole time you're thinking Matrix 1. And so everything that I do after that point of misunderstanding or assumption will lead me down the wrong path. So let's jump forward now. 2 weeks later, I'm like, Hamlet, I'm super excited to present to you and the board of directors at XYZ agency and friends. And here we go. And board after board, I'm just showing you Gladiator, Gladiator, more Gladiator. I'm showing you 300 or Spartacus or whatever it is that I'm showing you. And you're sitting there like, oh my God, when is this meeting going to be
Yeah.
over?
I thought we were
Although
getting
beautiful,
I thought we were getting the Matrix. Why are we
right?
getting
But see, here's the thing: you actually don't ever say that, but in your
uh,
mind, you're like, "This is beautiful work, but this is not what I was expecting." This is what we call a bad surprise. So this is the thing that I learned in sales. This is a dramatic portrayal of what's happening, but I hope I've illustrated the point clear to everybody. The buyer, in this case you, have different goals, challenges, and preconceived ideas and biases, just like I do. What I need to do is to listen to you, ask clarifying questions, being 100% present to the moment, ask evidence-based questions, meaning if you don't say it, I don't get to ask it. So if you're like, I'm not thinking about the weekend, I'm like, what are your plans for the weekend? And you'll sit there and say, I just told you I'm not thinking about the weekend right now. So that's where we feel like we're in rapport or we're out of rapport. And the whole point of this is to be as one. We're going to have a mind meld, like in the Vulcan way. Our minds are one. I need to see what you see. I need to feel what you feel so that you understand that I understand what you want. When I
oh
do
man.
that, you're going to hand me money.
I love that. I love the examples you use. I love how you use cinematic as the word, Matrix and Gladiator, and the contrasting elements of it. So the real key really is it's sort of like what product managers try to do and designers, if they do it well, it's really understanding the refinement process. Am I sales also feels like if you do that well, if you really dig deeper into what they really want, that could make sure you're saving time both on your pitch and where you're taking it, and there's alignment for it from their expectations. They might not even know it, right? So they might not even be sure what they want, but through the questions you ask, you can hopefully at that moment be able to guide them to the clarity that they're looking for. So that gives you enough to be able to produce off of that. Does that summarize that well?
Yes. Yes. And let's tie it back to the whole situation of your daughter or your son getting sick, right?
Right.
Are you expected to know what's wrong with them when you go see the doctor? Are you expected to have the language and to be able to diagnose and prescribe the solution? Doctor, it's one of the livers, I don't know my medical terminology, but something is not right, and their blood pressure and blood count and
It's
this
probably
and
even
that.
worse today because we're all Googling. We're like, I think it's
Yeah,
this, I think it's
WebMD
that.
experts, right?
Right.
And we'll come in, self-prescribe, self-diagnose. And then the doctor's job is not to intimidate you, not to like browbeat you to say, you don't know what you're talking about. And you know, the funny thing is, every time you go to make a doctor's appointment, whoever's on the other line, whether it's a robot, an AI, or a human being, they ask you a couple of preliminary questions. Have you ever wondered why they asked that? Right? And I think about these things myself. It's because they're trying to eliminate all kinds of potential problems, such that by the time you see the doctor, there's still two more steps in there. By the time you see the doctor, they have a pretty good idea as to what it is that you have, because their time is precious too. So when you actually show up, they'll check you in the counter, they'll ask you a few more questions, and then you're going to get seen by a nurse and they're going to do more diagnostics with you. They're going to ask you a few more clarifying questions. And so with the doctor outside the room, they're reading the clipboard and saying, oh, okay, medical history of this, allergies to that, recently went skiing and has some pain. So they have an idea. So they walk in there, they ask a few more questions, they do some tests, and their ability to ask the right question and to administer just the necessary test to you gives you confidence, or doesn't, that this is the right person. And if you say, I've had an aneurysm before, and they just don't even listen to that part, you're going to get really nervous. And what do? The way you respond is, I need a second opinion because I don't trust yours right now.
Right. Wow. It's incredible, man. I love hearing all of this, and I love how you wrapped it back up to not only the sales process, the value-based component of it, and let's transition this to another thing that you've spoken a lot about, which is a design camp. You spoke about personal branding and the attention economy. And so in this world we live in, this world where everyone is really fighting for visibility, how do people go about, or how do you balance both being present, right? Like as you are right now in this conversation, provide value and not feel overwhelmed by everything going on social media? Because I hear that a lot now. There's people that are like, I don't know how to break through social media. There's so much noise. There's so much clutter. Can you walk me through a little bit about your viewpoint on this?
Yeah. Whenever a new platform emerges, it's less noisy. And the early adopters, the innovators, they come in and do really interesting things. And then it starts to hit a point in which it hits critical mass and a whole bunch of people join. And those are not the early adopters. They're not the innovators. They're the middle majority, the late adopters, or the laggards, if you will, if you're on Facebook. It's something like that. And so what they do is they just emulate things that they see without understanding it. And it's very noisy because we're all doing the same thing, same. And what's happening is we're emulating an old model. That model is called advertising, because we all grew up in that model, and that's the most dominant form of media communication right now, because products, companies, and brands believe that the way to make money is to advertise to you or at you. So every time I'm watching a YouTube video, now even on Amazon, I'm like trying to enjoy my Amazon Rings of Power series, and I've got to watch 4 commercials.
That happened to you too, huh?
Yeah, unless you want to pay not to see them, so I'm like, shoot. Are the companies that are paying for this in the 21st century, in 2024, are they building positive sentiment or negative sentiment in the mind of the buyer? And we've become very good at tuning out advertisers. Like, there are banner ads and pop-up ads all over websites that you go to, news sites, entertainment, social media, whatever. You go there and there's ads everywhere. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty good. I have a built-in ad blocker. It's called my brain, because it's so self-centered in terms of its messaging, and it's so interruptive that I can block it out now. Right. It's funny because in the beginning, I don't know if you recall, in Web 1.0, when these ads came up, I'm like, oh, what is this? And I click on stuff. Now it's like I don't even see them, and they're all there, right? It used to be effective. So what's happening is it's like an echo chamber that reflects what we are familiar with, which is advertising. So when you're trying to create content, what do? We advertise. We're like, hey, I want to sell you this thing. By the way, sign up for this thing and do this. And we're asking for so much so that people just, their brain shut down. And so it becomes part of the noise. The good news that I have for you, it doesn't take a lot to stand out and to be the purple cow, if you're using Seth Godin's analogy or metaphor, to be different just enough so that it becomes remarkable, something worth remarking about. But we have to take a totally different approach here. So we have to stop doing what everyone's doing. We have to lean with value and lead with an act of generosity. And so I talk about this, maybe not in design camp, but this formula, it's called 911. And the formula is a ratio of what you should post, because that's one of the questions I get asked so often. What should I be posting, right? So the assumption here is your content has gone comatose. There's no more pulse. It's dead on the vine. Every time you post, it's like crickets. You're like begging for a little bit of attention. So what we do is we call emergency, we dial 911. And the formula is you have to create 9 pieces of content that are purely value driven. No CTA, don't do any, just create a transformation for me. And if you do that for long periods of time, the audience will start showing up again. They're like, wow, this is so valuable. Like our podcast or conversation today is value driven. You bring on guests, you ask questions, and you help to unlock things to explain complex concepts to people in a way that they can understand simply. And then you do the recap. That's value. But if you keep doing that, you, the person, are hiding behind the content. So the next one is for one piece that's totally personal. Because they see 9 pieces of value, like, well, who's this person? Are they real? Is it a group of people? Is it a bunch of 18-year-olds, or is it some grandpa sitting somewhere? I don't know who it is. So you post something that's purely personal to pull back the curtain, to reveal the person behind the content. Purely self-indulgent. It's just about you.
So they could connect with you, right? So they
need to connect with a human. That's it. Okay. And the last one, if you haven't already figured it out, is you get to have one unbridled, unabashed sell. You sell like a mother effer on that one. And you don't have to worry about hiding behind value, because you've given 9 pieces of value. You showed up one time to say, this is who I am. And by the way, I've got this book, or I've got a webinar. If you've enjoyed the content, this is how you can go deeper into the program, and I'm here to serve you. The problem that people have is they take the 9, the 1, and the 1, they mash it up so much so that, like these beautiful colors, when melted together, just look like mud, right? If you take something beautiful and you mash it up and you blend it, it's kind of gross. Everything almost looks like vomit at that point. So what you want to do is you want to keep these things segmented as value content, personal content, and I'm going to sell you hard right now, and they're not going to feel bad, and you won't have to feel embarrassed either.
I love it. I love the framework, the 911. That's some social gold, guys. If that didn't help, he broke it down on step forward with value. Don't try to sell anything, and then connect with your audience. Share something personal. It doesn't even have to be about work. It could be about something else, and then later on go for the CTA that you probably are doing too much now, and trim it down and be super focused. I love that, Chris. Thanks for sharing that. Let's talk about a little bit. I know we're getting close to the hour, and I want to be respectful of your time, and you're sharing so many incredible things. So I'm going to transition this a little bit to talking about the future a little bit, and where you see things going. Obviously, the business being called the future and all elements of it. So where do you see just the world of design and entrepreneurship, education? I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, and you want people to get so much value in their education system through your programs, but where do you see all this headed? And the reason I bring this up is there is so much out there now, right? Like the school systems that I feel like I went through, and I'm sure it sounds like we went to college roughly around the same time. I still teach at, I guest lecture at USC, and I know you're still active at the design schools as well. I feel back then we thought we were going through a radical change, but I feel like even more now. I look at my son, and I look at some of my team members as well, the way they can gather information, even from AI if they want to, or online through videos. There's just so much more. So where do you see education headed, and how can you stand apart and still, as we're talking about value, be able to provide that for the next generation of learners and doers of this world?
There's a couple of things we need to point out. Number one, I'm having this conversation with a university professor, and they said it used to be the prestigious universities were the centers of knowledge. Yale, Princeton, Harvard, the Ivy Leagues, Cambridge, wherever you go, Stanford, USC. They were the centers of knowledge because the people who wrote the papers that you read, who influenced the other people, are literally teaching there. And with the internet and the digitization of all human knowledge, and it's easily accessible for low to no money, these schools no longer become the centers of knowledge. They become the curators of knowledge. We have a new problem. We have an embarrassment of resources. And the problem is there's a lot of derivative work. So there's an originator of a concept of an idea, and then you see summaries of summaries of summaries. At some point, you can only make so many copies before it falls apart. And now we're looking at a blurry, splotchy mess. That's its own art form, but it's not representative of the original concept. Fine. So universities are the curators of the knowledge. They've read through the thousands of things that you're supposed to read, and they said, these are the two. And in fact, these are not just the two, but this is the sequence in which you should read these or consume this piece of content. But the premium in which they're placing on this is disproportionate to the value that you're going to get. So with a smart enough person using the internet and AI, they can recreate this experience. And in fact, a lot of the universities are releasing the curriculum for free. A lot of it digital online courses, MIT, a whole bunch of other schools are doing it for free because they understand that there's a problem, and they're supposed to be in the education business, not the money-making business. Number two is this other problem, which is, for the most part, universities exist for the common good, for the commonwealth, and they're not run by a person. They're run by organizations, by the board of trustees usually. The problem with any organization that has multiple people who have different interests is that what they do is they try to mitigate risk instead of innovate. I'll explain, because I've served on boards, a couple of boards, fairly small operations, but we have a mandate to look out and shepherd and be protectors of the organization. So anytime somebody's like, hey, I have a radical idea, we should innovate here. What do the 9 other board members say? That's risky, let's do assessment. And what they do is they board it to death. They just sit there and like, the committee decide and this and that. And by the time they're done, the person who had this idea is just beaten down. There's nothing left that's innovative because they've removed all the risk. But
Right.
We know this. Innovation is inherently wasteful and messy and full of risk and things that can go wrong. So when there's an organization deciding, there's very little that happens. So what we do is we just maintain the status quo. It makes sense. We got to play it safe. We got to play it safe. You have a fiduciary responsibility to the organization in which you serve to take care of the business that's come before. This happens across every board I've ever been on. Maybe there's a different one that exists out there. So now we have two problems. We're slow to respond. It's no one's responsibility, and we play it really safe. And we have this idea that, you know what? The information is free. What are we going to do? And we don't want to act in a way that's going to cannibalize our primary business model. So if we start to give away too much for free, who will go to university? So they think, but that's the wrong kind of thinking.
Right.
Now, here's the thing. We know the internet at one point was considered a fad or a trend. I know because I lived through that time. And now some people think AI is also a fad or a trend. It is not. It is on par, if not in orders of magnitude more influential and impactful to daily society than the internet was. And if you just think about how many businesses were transformed or displaced by the internet, AI will do that in orders of magnitude more. So what do we all need to do in education? Here's the problem. If it costs $24,000 a semester to go to private school per semester, and if we can then ask GPT or Claude or any one of these other AI things to teach us what we want to learn in the way that we want to learn it, in our neurodivergent brain, to tailor it specifically for us in the time in which we learn best, at night, in the morning, midday, after lunch, before lunch, and to go at a pace in which we can understand and ask it infinite questions without ever feeling stupid, embarrassed, or slowing down the class, we have a real problem right now. And I'm part of the problem, because despite producing educational content for a fraction of what you'd have to pay from a university, AI is going to do it cheaper and soon better. We all have a problem.
Right. So it's not, because obviously we have also, as well as the academy that we do, and we provide scholarships to everyone to apply and go to the Growth Academy. I'm wondering if we share the same viewpoint here. It's really not the content, at least I heard parts of this, but please clarify if I misunderstood it. It's really no longer the content per se, because the content consumption can easily be done. It's more how the delivery of that content is changing, and the old guard or the old education systems is still following the model of, hey, you're gonna have to come to class, you go to the classroom, you listen to the lecture, you go to the TA, you take the test. But the real way the children of today, at least my son is growing up, and I wonder if it applies to your kids as well, is they can learn everything that they want. I mean, he's learning stuff on YouTube every day. He's learning by reading, he's learning by doing, he's consuming it in bite sizes, and then he's formulating his own ideas. Obviously, he's raw at this state and he needs guidance. So is it really that transformation that needs to occur? Is the delivery of the content, or is it more like, I think about schools, like what we can't do as online programs, right, is facilitate full experiences. Like, hey, I'm sure what your design school can do and what USC could do and other schools can do is they can partner with large corporations and really immerse the kids into real life experiences that can get them ready to be not only workable, but build the confidence in them to be able to imagine your first year if it was leap year, right? Imagine if you had that in school itself. You might not even need to have to done that first year. You'd be like, man, I got to go through advertising agencies, 4 of them in my classes, in my curriculums, all these things that I learned. Do you see that happening in the near future, or where do you see all this going?
Okay. I think there's a model that works for everybody. Unfortunately, right now we're all siloed, and so it's like it's my church or my philosophy or it's theirs, and there's nothing in between. So I think what we do is, like, if I were the dean or head or president of a particular school, I say we got to be hybrid.
No board anymore. It's just you and I. This is
okay. It's just you and I were running the organization, right? So one person to make sure it happens, and one person is like, this is the big idea.
Right. We
So we
keep
look-
each other accountable, and we
That's
actually,
right.
yeah.
Okay, so we look at like, say Art Center is a small school, and it's the one that I understand. So there are a couple of campuses, and so we have space. And what do we use the space for? The spaces should be designed such that we can then come and have a communal experience And I think it's called, like, there's a place called Cosm or the Sphere in Las Vegas, where it's kind of this immersive shared virtual reality, and the kinds of images, I haven't been to one, but when I see them, I'm like, wow, this is incredible. We get to experience something like that. One of these state-of-the-art theaters has to be built so that when there's something for us to watch and learn, a lecture, it should be done to the highest degree. So we get back into the world of Hollywood, right? It should be filmed by somebody of stature and be taught by the best person to teach it. And there's a bunch of things that we have to kind of decide together as what the best is. Somebody who's engaging, somebody who's knowledgeable, who can tell stories and make the information come to life. And then we employ a whole team of visual effects artists and people with imagination, like probably people from Disney or Weta, DreamWorks or something like that, to build the world. So when they talk about an atom, they should be able to like this, and they should be able to open it up and we see it in their hands and it floats and it opens. And the level of production they
Oh
put
man, I'm
into
ready to
it.
go back to school. This is a
You see what I'm saying?
beautiful-
Right? It's like they put $250 million into like dumb movies. Why can't they spend $10 million to teach you something that's so important? And there's screenwriters and people who build mock-ups and models, and the information comes to life. So the content is fantastic. The viewing experience is wholly unique. And there is something about a community experience. So you go to school to experience the lectures, and lectures, if they were done that way, would be super interesting. And what the rest of the campus is set up for is lab time, experiential kinesthetic learning, hands-on. Now, in my entire school career, from kindergarten through college, the classes that meant the most were the ones where I got to do something, not listen to someone else do something. Whether it's from chemistry or physics or biology, art history, I'm just watching someone.
Right.
I'm not living history. So in those moments, I think what we do is we use the free resources now, instead of like holding classrooms and paying for people to clean rooms, is then instead of talking about the Mona Lisa, we go to the Louvre in Paris and we see the Mona Lisa about that big, it's a lot smaller than you think. Or we see David and we look at the statue and we talk about it, so we get to experience it, and we get to experience an immersive culture. So part of the program needs to be sometimes on the road. The last part is the rest of the spaces should be used for students to work together, because as it turns out, students learn more from each other than they do from the professor. Like, how'd you do that? Because they're at the level in which they're just a little bit ahead of them versus 25 years into a career, and they can teach them in much smaller steps. And the rest of the time you're living on campus, you're getting to experience the social aspect of it, and you get to have this wonderful thing. Now, we're starting to see a more hybrid and modern school that can then also be broadcasted to the rest of the world. So when we're doing live lectures, we should have 85 cameras, virtual reality cameras, 360, mic'd up to the T, so that you can hear a pin drop. So someone in South Africa, Sudan, in the Philippines can participate in the $2 class experience. It won't be the same as the one who's paying $25,000, but they're paying for very different experiences. And there's a gradient that exists between those two spectrums.
Man, I love approved.
Okay, we're doing
The board has approved this. This is the school I love.
we execute on this idea.
Let's do it, Chris. Chris, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed our conversation. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the easiest and best way for them to be able to connect with you?
If you want to find me on social media, I'm everywhere on most social platforms at the Chris Do. Do is spelled D-O. If you want to look into some of our programs and our initiatives, speaking events and things like that to join us in person, go to thefutur.com. The Future spelled F-U-T-U-R, no E.com. Thefutur.com.
Thank you, Chris. And that wraps up another insightful episode of A Growth Ventures podcast. Chris, it's been incredible having you share your journey, your mission, and your deep insights into creativity, business, and personal growth. To our listeners, if today's conversation resonated with you, be sure to check out The Futur without an E for more information on Chris's groundbreaking work. We'll have all the links in the show notes. Thank you again, Chris, for joining us and sharing your wisdom. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with anyone looking to take their creative ventures to the next level. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and growing your ventures. Thank you, everyone.